The cold marble floors of the Whitmore estate gleamed under the chandelier's light, but Marcus barely noticed anymore. For 15 years, he'd pushed his mop across these same floors, invisible to the wealthy family who lived here. At 62, with arthritis creeping into his joints and reading glasses held together by tape, he was just part of the furniture. Another fixture in a mansion worth more than he'd earn in 10 lifetimes. That Tuesday evening started like any other. Marcus was finishing his rounds when he heard booming laughter, echoing from the study. Sebastian Whitmore, the tech billionaire, whose fortune had been splashed across every magazine cover that month, was entertaining guests again. Marcus had learned long ago to make himself scarce during these gatherings, but as he turned to leave, Sebastian's voice cut through the air. "You there? Janitor!" Marcus froze, his weathered hands tightening on the mop handle. He turned slowly to find Sebastian standing in the doorway, flanked by half a dozen men in expensive suits, their faces flushed with wine and arrogance. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied quietly. Sebastian's eyes glittered with alcohol and mischief. He gestured grandly toward an enormous safe built into the wall of his study, its imposing steel door catching the light. "See that safe? It's been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather installed the most sophisticated lock system of his time, and he took the combination to his grave. Cost me a fortune trying to crack it open." The men behind him chuckled, sensing entertainment coming. "I'll tell you what," Sebastian continued, swaying slightly. "I'll give you $100 million, cash, if you can open that safe. Right now." He threw his head back and laughed, and his friends joined in, the sound harsh and mocking in the quiet mansion. Marcus stood there, feeling the familiar sting of humiliation. This was a game to them. He was a game to them. "Mr. Whitmore, I don't know anything about—" Marcus began. "What's wrong?" "Not interested in being rich?" Sebastian interrupted, his tone dripping with condescension. "Oh, wait, I forgot. People like you wouldn't even know what to do with that kind of money, would you?" Something flickered in Marcus's chest, not anger, but a deep, quiet sadness. He thought of his daughter, Sarah, working 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school. He thought of his late wife's medical bills that had swallowed their savings. He thought of the small apartment he'd called home for the past decade, where the heat barely worked in winter. But more than anything, he thought of his father's words. "Dignity isn't what others give you, son. It's what you refuse to surrender." "Actually, sir," Marcus said softly, setting down his mop, "I think I'd like to try." The laughter died instantly. Sebastian's eyebrows shot up. "You're serious?" "Yes, sir." The room erupted in fresh laughter, louder than before. Sebastian, intrigued now and sensing more entertainment, waved Marcus forward. "Be my guest. You've got 5 minutes. When you fail, you can get back to mopping." Marcus walked past the jeering men, his worn sneakers silent on the Persian rug. He stood before the safe, running his calloused fingers over the cold metal. The combination dial was intricate, with numbers and symbols he'd never seen before. But Marcus wasn't looking at the dial. He was remembering. 15 years of invisible service. 15 years of arriving before dawn and leaving after dusk. 15 years of being in this house more than his own home. And in those 15 years, he'd noticed things. Things that people who feel superior rarely think the help will see or remember. Marcus had cleaned Sebastian's grandfather's bedroom when the old man had been bedridden in his final years. He'd been there during the late-night conversations, virtually invisible as family members argued over the will. He'd organized the study after the funeral, carefully handling photographs and personal effects. And he remembered one photograph in particular. Sebastian's grandfather holding a young Sebastian, a date scribbled on the back. The old man had mentioned once, in a moment when sickness had made him forget Marcus was even in the room, that the happiest day of his life was when his first grandchild was born. Marcus turned the dial slowly. Right to 18, left to 7, right to 1985. The laughter had quieted. The room held its breath. Marcus pulled the handle. The massive safe door swung open with a deep mechanical sigh. Silence crashed over the room like a wave. Sebastian's face drained of color. His friends stood frozen, their smirks melting into shock. Inside the safe, stacks of old documents lay untouched for decades, along with several boxes of jewelry and bonds. But Marcus didn't reach for any of it. He simply stepped back, his heart pounding. "How?" Sebastian whispered, moving forward like a man in a trance. "How did you possibly—" "Your grandfather's birthday, sir," Marcus said quietly. "July 18th, 1985, the day you were born. He kept the photograph on his nightstand until he passed. I saw it many times while cleaning his room." Sebastian stared at the open safe, then at Marcus, something shifting behind his eyes. The smugness had evaporated. For the first time in perhaps forever, he was truly seeing the man in front of him. One of his friends broke the silence with a nervous laugh. "Well, Sebastian, looks like you owe the janitor $100 million. But Sebastian didn't laugh. He was looking at Marcus with an expression the old janitor couldn't quite read, shame perhaps, mixed with something else. "You remembered that," Sebastian said softly. "You were there all those years and you remembered." "I remember a lot of things, sir," Marcus replied. "I remember your grandfather was kind to me. Always said thank you, asked about my family. He was a good man." The words hung in the air, an unspoken contrast that made Sebastian flinch. Sebastian's hand trembled slightly as he reached into the safe and pulled out one of the old documents, his grandfather's will. He skimmed it, and Marcus saw his face change again, softening into something that might have been grief. "He wrote about me," Sebastian murmured. "About hoping I'd become a man of character, not just wealth." He looked up at Marcus, and his eyes were bright. "I don't think I've been the man he wanted me to be." Marcus didn't reply. Some truths don't need confirming. Sebastian's friends shuffled uncomfortably, suddenly eager to be anywhere else. They mumbled excuses and filtered out, leaving just the two men in the study, the billionaire and the janitor, separated by everything and nothing at all. "I said I'd give you $100 million, Sebastian finally said. "You did, sir. I'm a man of my word." Sebastian's voice was stronger now, more certain. "But I need to ask you something first." "What would you do with it?" "The money?" Marcus thought of Sarah, his beautiful daughter with her, mother's smile and her grandmother's determination. He thought of the medical clinic in his neighborhood that desperately needed funding. He thought of all the families like his own, one emergency away from losing everything. "I'd make sure my daughter never has to worry about finishing school," Marcus said. "I'd pay forward every kindness your grandfather showed me. I'd help people who need it, sir. Because money, in my experience, is only as good as what you do with it." Sebastian nodded slowly, tears now openly streaming down his face. "My grandfather would have liked you," he whispered. "Really liked you?" "He did, sir. He told me once." That seemed to break something in Sebastian. He sat down heavily in his leather chair, buried his face in his hands, and wept. Not the polite tears of a funeral or the calculated emotion of a business deal, but the raw, ugly crying of a man confronting everything he'd become. Marcus stood there uncertain. Until his heart made the decision his mind was still considering. He walked over and placed a gentle hand on Sebastian's shoulder, a gesture of comfort he'd given his own son 1,000 times. "It's not too late," Marcus said softly. "It's never too late to become who you're meant to be." 3 weeks later, Marcus walked into his daughter's apartment carrying the mail. Sarah looked up from her textbooks, exhausted from another double shift. "Dad, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus handed her an envelope. Inside was a check for $5 million, along with a handwritten note. "For Sarah's education and future. Your father earned this through patience, dignity, and remembering the humanity in people others have forgotten. Sebastian Whitmore." But that wasn't all. The second letter informed Marcus that he was being named Director of Community Outreach for the Whitmore Foundation, with a salary that made Sarah's eyes widen. His job would be to identify people and organizations in need and help them using a fund of $95 million. "Dad, how?" Sarah couldn't form the words. Marcus smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I opened a safe, honey. But I think maybe I opened something else too. The Whitmore estate looks different now. The marble floors still gleam. But Marcus walks them with his head held high, not as the invisible help, but as a respected colleague. Sebastian, for his part, is learning. Learning to say thank you. Learning to ask about people's families. Learning that his grandfather's true legacy wasn't the money in the safe, but the character he'd hoped his grandson would develop, sometimes late at night. Marcus stands before that safe, still open after all these weeks. And he thinks about how the most valuable things in life aren't locked away in steel and combination codes. They're in the moments we choose to truly see each other, to remember each other's humanity, to recognize that worth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the kindness we show when no one's keeping score. The janitor had opened more than a safe that night. He'd opened a heart. And in doing so, he'd unlocked something far more valuable than $100 million. He'd proven that dignity, memory, and compassion are riches no vault can contain.